Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another live Dhamma talk here with Empty Cloud Monastery. This evening, we're happy to have with us a special guest. So Bhante Rahula, one of the very senior monks, one of the most senior Western Buddhist monks currently around. So we're very happy to have Bhante Rahula with us to share some teachings on dependent origination and give us some instructions on how to use it in our practice. So without further preamble, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Bhante Rahula to guide us in the way that he sees fit to guide us. So please, Bhante, go ahead.
Well, I'd like to thank Venerable Sudaso and Ayya Soma for inviting me to share some Dhamma with all of you. And so we're going to start with a short meditation just to try to focus, relax our minds, center our minds into the present moment, using the body and the breathing to help anchor our attention to the present moment. So if you're, sitting in a chair or on the floor there, just try to sit in a comfortable position. Try to keep your back straight and your head, chin lifted up level to the floor. And just relax the shoulders. Just gently close your eyes. And just feel the weight of the body pressing the seat. Try to feel your buttocks and feet pressing the floor. Just feel that solid contact. And just remind yourself of sitting, present moment of the body. And feel your hands and fingers touching together where they touch the body. See if you can feel the outline of your fingers or thumbs. Just developing awareness of the body. And feel the weight of the weight of the arms hanging from the shoulders. Relax the shoulders. Try to feel where the clothing touches the skin of the shoulders, upper arms. And just remind yourself of sitting. Now feel the head balanced on top of the neck. And just lightly center your attention behind the eyes. Just feel your eyes in the sockets. Just feel the eyelids stretched over the eyeballs. From that point behind the eyes, just feel some other sensations on your face. Feeling of your lips touching together, the nose. And still kind of just resting the attention behind the eyes. See if you can sort of expand the awareness to feel the outline of the sitting body, the sense of your head on top, arms at the sides, feet underneath, buttocks pressing the seat. Not in detail, just a general sense of sitting. And then take a few deep, slow breaths. Try to take about 3 seconds to expand your abdomen, rib cage, and upper chest. Hold the air in the lungs for 2 or 3 seconds to feel the pause. And feel the relaxing contractions of the out breath. Try to feel the last bit of air go out of the lungs. Just take a few more deep, slow breaths like that, cultivating this basic mindfulness. And breathing in, letting go of the past and future. Breathing out, sitting here and now. Breathing in, letting go of the past and future. Breathing out, sitting here and now. Breathing in, feeling the whole body. Breathing out, feeling the whole body. Now we're going to try to count the breaths from 1 to 10. Actually, I'll do the counting for you. Just keep your attention. Try to feel the expanding and contracting movements of the abdomen, rib cage, or chest. And on the next expanding in breath, mentally count to 1. Feel the brief pause with the contracting out breath. Also count to 1. The next in breath, 2. Out breath, 2. In breath, 3. Out breath, 3. In breath, 4. Out breath, 4. In breath, 5. Out breath, 5. In breath, 6. Out breath, 6. In breath, 7. Out breath, 7. In breath, 8. Out breath, 8. In breath, 9. Out breath, 9. In breath, 10. Out breath, 10. Now discontinue the counting. Let the breathing return to its own uncontrolled, shorter, irregular rhythm. But continue to feel it. You feel the air as it's coming through the nostrils, or as the lungs expand and contract, whichever spot you're familiar with. And just know when the breath is coming in, and knowing when the breath is going out. You know it by feeling it. Just try to notice the 4 phases of the breath cycle, the incoming breath and the brief pause, the outgoing breath and the brief pause. Breath by breath, moment by moment. Especially with each out breath, just letting go of the past and future, allowing the mind to relax more and more into the present moment. present moment, sitting, breathing, breathing in, sitting, breathing out, sitting. This breathing body is the natural connection to the present moment. Mind's natural connection to the present moment. Try to feel the breathing body within the larger physical body. Try to feel that organic interconnection of the breathing in the body. Breathing in, sitting. Breathing out, sitting. At the same time, be alert for thoughts sneaking up into the mind. Just let the thoughts come and go in the back of the mind. Keep the feeling of the breathing body in front of the awareness. If there's too many thoughts, come back and do some slightly deeper, slower breathing to help stay grounded, centered in the body. Breathing in, sitting. Breathing out, sitting. Sensations come and go. Pleasure and pain come and go. Sounds come and go. Thoughts and urges come and go. Thoughts of I, me, and mine come and go. These are all just the continuous flow of the impermanence of the body, mind, and the world through the space of awareness. Through the space of present moment awareness. If we lose that connection to the breathing body, the present moment, and the mind gets easily lost and tossed about on the stormy seas of greed, hatred, and deluded thoughts, worry, fear, anxiety. This breathing body acts as our life preserver, our lifeline to the present moment. Where we can clearly see deep into our own mind. To discover the causes of suffering. And the states of happiness. Dukkha pata chani dukkha bhaya pata chani bhaya sokha pata chani sokha hontu sabbi pipanino. May the suffering be free from suffering. May the fear struck be free from fear. May the grieving be free from grief. In this way, may all beings live with mindfulness and wisdom. And thus spoke the Buddha. Now, gently place your hands at the edge of the knees, and on the next in-breath, stretch your head back and pull the hands against the knees to arch your lower spine. Hold it a few moments. And lift the head up with an in-breath, and on the out-breath, press the chin to the top of the chest to stretch the neck vertebra. Lift the chin up level on an in-breath and relax on the out-breath. Okay, friends, so in this Dhamma talk tonight, I think you have read the title of the talk. I'm going to be trying to kind of go over and explain to a certain extent the concept of rebirth, and especially how it is described in the 12 links of dependent origination, or the Paṭicca-Samuppāda. So the Paṭicca-Samuppāda is a cornerstone discourse or text teaching of the Buddha, the 12 links of dependent origination. Sometimes it's called interdependent origination. And there's different aspects to it. And of course, you know, the idea of rebirth, at least for most Buddhists, is a central concept or within the Buddhist teaching. And certainly we can see that in many hundreds of different suttas, the Buddha referring to this idea about rebirth. But normally it is explained in what I like to call the lifetime to lifetime rebirth process, or external rebirth. Now, this also, it's explained in the dependent origination, the 12 links of dependent origination. I'm not going to, I'm going to go through them, but basically it explains the process, how the mind and body undergoes these various levels of thinking and conditioning that lead the mind to be born again. But actually the term for rebirth in the Pali language is punabhava, or again becoming. And the term of reincarnation that the Hindus often use, or some other people, that's not really normally in the Theravada tradition. We don't use that term, because reincarnation often has the idea of some kind of a static soul that reincarnates from lifetime to lifetime. Now that isn't exactly the process that is explained within the Theravada viewpoint, or the Buddha explained it, and especially in the dependent origination. Now again, it's a difficult concept to understand, and we know that many people, here in the Western countries may not believe in rebirth because of their other conditionings, philosophical or religious conditionings. They may think that that's not true, or even, of course, modern science to a large degree doesn't also recognize that our mind can, this mind can be re-arise in another lifetime after the physical death. So this concept of Saṁsāra, so the process of birth and death, is described as Saṁsāra. And one of the meanings, this Pali word, is perpetual wandering. But basically it refers to our mind. And our mind is what is actually going through this process. The body just kind of is a continuation of that, is an external manifestation of our mind. Now I'm going to talk about the mental aspects, the moment-to-moment rebirth in next week's talk, but in this week I want to just try to kind of go over this external rebirth. And I call it external rebirth because, the idea is, okay, when we grow old and we die, if the mind still has fuel and still has ignorance, greed, and other defilements, then this is considered to be like a fuel, like a car needs fuel. And when the body dies, the consciousness, this propels the consciousness, and again, it's not our consciousness, as we'll see later, but the consciousness, to re-arise in another realm, and not only the human realm, but there's other realms of where the mind can be reborn. And it is reborn according to its karmic propensities. What are the strongest accumulated karmic propensities or memories that a person had acquired, not only in this one lifetime, but even in lifetimes before this current one. So if a person dies still with these accumulated what are called sankharas and ignorance, then it will be attracted. Basically, no one is sending the mind anywhere. It's basically gets attracted like a magnetic pull to another dimension or a body that will help it to work out its karma, so to speak. That's a popular phrase these days, people working out their karma. Karma basically means our actions and the accumulated effects of those actions that are within the unconscious mind and that make us continue repeating the similar actions over and over again. So anyway, the Buddha, he never pointed out that there was a first cause for when this process of Saṁsāra started in individual minds. And so some people might say, well, what do you mean? He didn't point out a first cause, and he must not be enlightened. Well, so-and-so, we believe that it was started 5,000 years ago with this person or these things, and all of a sudden there was people on the earth. And it's not so easy, not so simple as that within the Buddhist sort of cosmological outlook. But anyway, so no first point is determined. But the process of how the mind continues and how the process of the rebirth continues, the Buddha discovered that through his profound, deep meditation and the development of his very powerful mind, through his practice of the Dhamma, through his practice in developing concentration to the maximum degrees. His meditation, developing concentration and mindfulness is like turning up the power of a microscope. And, the Buddha had that ability to develop his concentration to the max, so to speak, and, to the max of an electron microscope, and basically smash the atom, even as it were, and to see that essentially there is no solid, fine particles that exist as such. But anyway, so I don't want to get carried away too far in that. So anyway, the ignorance is considered to be the primary cause for I wouldn't say the cause of ignorance or the cause of rebirth, but the continuation of it. Okay, it's already caused. We may not know the exact moment, but we can see that it's been continuing for a long period of time. In fact, the Buddha said with his powerful mind, he could go back with his unconscious mind and uncover like thousands, even hundreds of thousands of past existences. And, he went back so far, and he was trying to find a first cause, and he went back hundreds of thousands of lifetimes, and he said, enough is enough, there's no point in discovering the beginning. He saw how it was continuing because of the accumulation of karma, and how the mind was reborn in different realms, depending on the vibration of the consciousness, basically about the time of the death. So that the vibration of our consciousness, if it's full of greed, hatred, and delusion, and horrible memories of doing all kinds of, killing, and all kinds of vicious and violent actions, then the mind may be attracted to a plane where they would get to experience these similar kinds of things because they were so used to it. So it's like the like attract like a magnetic pull. A violent mind may be attracted to a violent destiny. And the same way with a very peaceful and calm mind, it could be attracted to the Deva realms and celestial realms, or even a very good human. But so I'm not going to bother you with all these different details of the realms of rebirth, but you can read those in the Buddhist texts. So, but basically, the law of karma is one of the principal cornerstones of the teachings of the Buddha. And usually it's called karma and rebirth. But, if people don't believe in rebirth, at least, they should believe in karma. Because even in this lifetime, even if we are not reborn, even in this lifetime, we reap the results of our suffering over and over and over and over again. So there's enough of that suffering even in this one lifetime to be convinced of the law of karma. But anyway, I'll talk more about that later. So that's why, the whole of the Buddhist teaching basically in this process of samsara comes from the first two verses of the Dhammapada, which goes basically, all actions are led by the mind. Mind is their master, mind is their maker. If one acts or speaks with an impure state of mind, that means with greed, hatred, or delusion, then suffering and problems will follow that person. Like the cartwheel follows the foot of the ox. That's a very apt kind of a simile. If you've ever seen a drought ox pulling an ox cart, and the wheel is that far away from his back feet, pulling these heavy loads. So anyway, and in the same way, if one acts or speaks with a more pure state of mind, with more love, compassion, kindness, patience, and wisdom, then comfort and happiness will follow them like the shadow follows around. So this following can follow them in this life with good consequences, and if there's still fuel for rebirth, then the mind will be attracted, as I mentioned, to another. Could be a human birth, it could be a birth as an animal or deva or in some Brahma realms, but we might mention those later. So anyway, I just want to get to the starting point of ignorance is really what drives the mind. Ignorance means not understanding the Four Noble Truths. Ignorance is defined by the Buddha means not understanding suffering, not understanding the cause of suffering, not understanding that there can be an end to suffering by removing the cause, and the path leading to the ending of suffering, or the way to live, think, and meditate that will gradually unravel all the karmic knots in the mind and the conditioning and allow a person to experience liberation. So this liberation is usually, called the nibbana. Okay, so I'm just trying to get to a starting point, hereby, so the ignorance, even though there's no first cause, we've accumulated. Ignorance means not understanding the Four Noble Truths, but it means not understanding our mind, and not understanding the nature of the world, not understanding how our own mind works. It's ignorance of our own mind, not knowing how it works, and not knowing how it's got itself caught up in all these knots of conditioning, and especially negative conditioning that keep bringing a lot of problems and suffering, greed, hatred, and delusion. So greed, hatred, and delusion are considered to be the roots of ignorance. But the way the Buddha defined it, it's not understanding the suffering, its cause, the cessation, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering. So, depending on ignorance, the way the Paṭicca-Samuppāda is worded, depending on ignorance arises the volitional formations. And these volitional formations are essentially the accumulated habits and conditionings, the wants and the desires and the memories. It's a very big group of mental activities, but basically the unconscious mind. They're all sort of, we use the term in the unconscious mind. But mainly it's the habits and the habits of thinking and believing, and also the memories of things that one have done, whether you were killed or killed others or were killed, and had other types of, things, whatever one might have did. But we don't have any real conscious memory of that normally. But anyway, so these sankharas, and especially it's a sankhara of the ego sense, the I, the sense of I that's there in the mind. But it's also the habits that this I has created. The habits of I like this and I want that, and these things happen to me, and I'm going to do these things, and all of these add to this level of the sankhara, the habits. So this is the fuel that fuels the consciousness, and so depending on ignorance arise volitional formations. So these volitional formations are already there in our mind. I mean, basically, we were born, the baby is born already with accumulated ignorance in these volitional formations in their little baby mind. But as they grow up, then these memories and so on from the past get stronger. So these, when you die, if you have a lot of these volitional formations, if you haven't attained enlightenment, then you're going to have some degree of volitional formations. But the ordinary person who doesn't understand Dhamma, or has never practiced meditation, or hasn't worked on really purifying their mind of greed, hatred, and delusions, then their mind this is a very powerful energy, And look at the power of the human mind. It's caused the Holocaust. It's caused all these every war, and every kind of suffering in the world is due to the mind of greed, hatred, and delusion. And this is a collective kind of thing, because we've been passing it down through genes and down through cultures and conditionings. So when the average person dies, these volitional formations will power the consciousness. So when the dead person dies, when the person is dying, it is said that the strongest memories or strongest habits that the person had accumulated in the life are going to rise up and be a determining factor in where that, what is called relinking consciousness, is attracted to another plane of existence, whether it's to another human mother in the womb, or it could be an animal womb. If one has lived like an animal in this life, then they could be reborn as an animal. Or in a deva realm, if their mind was quite pure and so on, be born in some celestial realms. But anyway, it's the karma, the sort of the magnetized vibration of consciousness, which gets attracted to that realm. Again, it's no creator being or anybody else that's saying, oh, now you have to go there because you did this and that. That's an easy solution, of course, but it's not what the Buddha understood. So the sankharas are which drive that consciousness to seek existence again, because in that consciousness there's the craving to exist, which is called bhava, kama bhava. We'll talk about later. So with ego consciousness, and people with strong egos especially, and they have that craving to live, or even if you have a craving not to live, we'll talk about that later. But anyway, this ignorance, basically ignorance and these sankharas are like fuel, like a gas tank. Your car, as long as you keep putting gasoline in the tank, then your car will still keep going, right? Well, these bodies are like the car. We keep putting gas in the tank. That means accumulating more and more karma due to greed, hatred, and delusion and ignorance that keeps the tank full. And so when you die, this fuel just propels the consciousness to be attracted to a plane of existence where it can kind of carry on, you might say, with its evolutionary state. It's a state of whether it's on a spiritual path or where it's on a path of, getting into more and more suffering. So anyway, so far we have, depending on ignorance, arise the volitional formations. Depending on volitional formations, arises the consciousness. And in the lifetime to lifetime, this consciousness means the relinking consciousness that leaves the body at the time of death. And some people say it leaves through your head, others through the feet, this and this, and we don't know where it leaves from. But anyway, it leaves the body. That's why when death is pronounced, basically this body is lifeless, because that consciousness is actually the spark of life that keeps the body alive. But if the body can no longer support the consciousness because of your breathing stops, your heartbeat stops, or for some other reason connected with that, the body is going to die and the consciousness gets released. And really, the average person is not going to be able to control that. Maybe some very high adepts and people who've developed their meditation skills to very, very, very high degree level and so on, might be able to kind of guide or determine where their mind may go, but normally not. So anyway, then because of the consciousness, you get the relinking consciousness goes into another womb and develops the mind and body. And actually with the death, that relinking consciousness comes, and then there's birth, but we're going to talk about that later. So this relinking consciousness goes, and birth takes place again, but then the consciousness develops the mind and body. The consciousness goes into a womb. There's not birth yet, but so for 9 months, let's take the example of a human baby. So for 9 months, this new consciousness, and it's not the same as the old one. It's a new one. It's described as not being the same and not being altogether different, because the habits and memories and so on, it's like a continuity. The simile of a candle flame, lighting one candle, lighting one out candle with another candle, and then that flame doesn't go to the new candle, but because of the flame from the old one, the new candle got lit. Whenever there's a new wax in a wick, then the fire will burn again. So the consciousness needs a body to work, to experience the world. So anyway, this consciousness develops what is called nama rupa, the mind and body, which is developing in the womb. And then finally, the baby gets born. Now, this doesn't follow in direct sequence because it's a little bit complicated to explain. But anyway, so the sankharas and so on that came along with the rebirth, the relinking consciousness, help to determine, even what the sex of the baby might be, or whether that baby might have some serious malformations or, different sort of karmic effects. And I know a lot of people find it hard to believe, but anyway, this is the general idea behind this, progress of this rebirth process. So then the baby comes out of the womb. And then when so the mind and body is developing in that small baby. So, the small baby after 9 months, it has a pretty much developed body and consciousness. And now it needs exposure to the world. So it comes out and there's contact where the 6 senses, along with the body, there are come the 6 senses. So we all know the baby has eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So even in the womb, they can hear things too. So the mind and body develop the 6 senses. And then the baby comes out and there's contact with the world. Although we know that even in the womb, there's contact, the baby can hear sounds and so on. But let's keep it simple, don't make it too complicated right now. So the baby comes out and then its senses are awakened. It can, see things, hear things, smell, taste, touch, feel things. And this is called contact. So depending on the 6 senses, we have the contact. Now, the mind contact may not be working too much because there's not too much in the baby's mind yet in terms of memories and likes and dislikes and so on. So there may not be a whole lot of thoughts and other things going on in the young baby's mind. But as it starts to grow up, yes, the mind starts developing its network of synapses and all kinds of other, brain functions and memory, and then it gets evolves. So depending on the contact, so depending on the 6 senses, we have contact. Now, this is even happening in our regular life. That's why this is a little bit different. What I'm going to explain tomorrow is going to be a little bit different than what I'm explaining today. That this contact comes with the birth when the baby comes out of the womb, for the most part, and then it encounters the world. And it starts to see things, and it starts to, parents give it a name and, call it little Johnny or Susie. And, in the beginning, the baby doesn't have a built-up ego consciousness. Its mind is more expanded, kind of an expanded awareness, what they call oceanic awareness, without a nucleus of an ego yet. But the parents give it a name and start, giving it things, and relatives come over and hold it, and, gitty goo, and little by little, a little nucleus of an ego starts to form in the baby's mind. And then that gets cemented. We start to learn language. So then the mind really gets into high gear, and its memory of past life things start to come about. If it smells something, it smelled like something maybe from a past life, or saw something, we've seen stories or you on the TV or in books about young kids who 5 or 6 years old who the parents were on a drive and they saw a house and, hey, that's my house. And the parents would think, what are you talking about? You've heard these stories before, or the World War II pilot who got shot down in the ocean, and then he remembered where his plane went down, and all kinds of stories. So these memories from the past life, especially with children, can come up because their mind is still kind of fresh. It's not burdened with the day-to-day concerns of, the older people. So anyway, so then craving develops. So dependent on contact, craving arises. So the baby starts developing likes and dislikes, and depending on sensation. I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow, but it's important. It's a very important aspect about understanding how the mind got conditioned. So, in the beginning, the baby really doesn't have any conscious likes or dislikes and doesn't really know anything. But, maybe the grandmother comes by with the first sweet and the baby tastes the first chocolate and gets a pleasant feeling. So it's a pleasant feeling. And then the baby recognizes the face and associates that with a pleasant feeling. This pleasant feeling becomes because his face came around. And then maybe the uncle or grandfather didn't give the baby anything, or maybe held it too tight and caused discomfort. And then the baby starts to recognize, that face causes pain. And, and starts to fear, doesn't want that face to come again in the future. So little by little, with all kind, maybe the cat comes by and scratches the baby or something, and then he got the fear of the cat. So these perceptions then become associated with pain or pleasure. And as the baby grows up, month by month, year by year, experiencing different things, everything that it comes into contact with, it's either he categorizes it as something he likes or dislikes. He may not do that consciously, but these are, nervous system conditionings. So everything basically becomes a pleasurable or a painful feeling or a neutral feeling. But neutral feelings don't, cause too much suffering. They're very subtle. But the pain and pleasure ones, the ones we develop desire for. So we desire, the baby starts wanting pleasurable feelings, and he wants to avoid the painful feelings. So actually, at this point, the past and future start to be born in the baby's mind also. Because he's hoping that pleasurable feeling, that grandmother will come again, or anything else that causes a pleasurable feeling, it's hoping it will come again. And anything that gave it a painful feeling, it's hoping it won't come again. And so it starts also developing fear for painful feelings and craving and desire for pleasurable feelings. And that's mainly because it's lost that natural connection to the present moment. And I forgot to mention that, for 9 months in the womb, basically the little mind of the developing fetus was probably most of the time in a state of present moment awareness, feeling all that tremendous energy of going from a one-cell organism at the time of conception to a multi-billion or trillion cell organism at the time of 9 months of birth. And that's a lot of energy, going through the nervous system. So, probably our consciousness was just really, there, consumed by that process, in a state of kind of being at one with it. I mean, I don't know. I can't remember time in the womb, but, for whatever it's worth. So anyway, so basically, in the baby's mind when it's born also is basically in a state of present moment awareness. But gradually it loses that, as I already mentioned, once they start to identify things as pleasurable or painful, and then wanting them in the future and wanting to go away. That's how the past and future, we get disconnected from the body. And the baby's mind starts focusing in the external world. And it loses that intimate connection with the body, which is basically always in the present moment, those present moment vibrations of the body. And so its mind gets focused in the future primarily. And then it develops the craving. So then, dependent on this contact, arises craving. And craving basically is the desire to get things in the future that we don't have, usually connected with pleasurable feeling in any of the senses, something we want to see, hear, taste, smell, touch, even think about. We have some pleasant memories we like to think about. We enjoy to think about them, or painful memories we don't want to think about. And so we, have aversion. So anyway, depending on these, the contact, these feelings arise. Actually, depending on contact, the feelings arise, pleasant and painful feelings. And depending on that, the craving means there's positive craving. We want the pleasurable feelings. And negative craving, that means we want to get away from the painful feelings. And the mind gets caught up in this process, and virtually the rest of the life, the mind is probably 95% of the time just going back and forth between wanting pleasurable sensations and wanting to get away from painful, uncomfortable sensations. So that's where the craving and aversion arise. So depending on the feeling, we develop craving. And craving means both craving for and craving to get away from. And actually, there's 3 kinds of craving mentioned by the Buddha and some other suttas. That means the craving for sensual pleasures, the craving for being. That means we crave to live. We want to live. Or some people might want to die, which is called craving to die or to get annihilated. They're so disgusted with life that they want life to end. They don't want to live anymore. So that's called a craving not to exist anymore. And then, so this craving is, this fuel that then starts the karma process. And then there's grasping. Dependent on craving arises grasping. Now, grasping is basically a stronger form of craving. So craving is the initial thought that comes into our mind. We might think, I want an ice cold soda on a hot day or something, or, You see some person and you might have some slight desire arise in the mind about wanting to, get close to this person. But if you have a strong mindfulness, then you might recognize that, and the thought may go out of your mind and it might not do anything, might not go anyplace. But if you latch on to that object and you say, yes, I want to have that object, I need that object. That's called the grasping. That means you're grasping the object, or holding on to it and building it up. And so grasping basically is the continued thinking about how you're going to get a hold of that object, or how you're going to get away from the object. The planning, the scheming, the conniving, the telling lies, this or whatever, the whole gamut of, actions and thoughts, how the mind works to get what it wants, right? It can be very devious. Right? So, but that's part of the grasping. The craving itself is not really that strong. But it turns into grasping if you don't know how to practice, if you haven't trained your mind. So, for all intents and purposes, the craving immediately turns into grasping for, a lot of people a lot of the time. And then this grasping, so again, the grasping can go on for a lot. It could be like a whole series of thoughts in your mind. How am I going to get this? How am I going to get this? And then finally you come to a point of making a decision. And you make a decision. And that is called the becoming, or bhava. So depending on grasping arises becoming. Now it's a little bit complex, but to keep it simple, I'm going to talk more about tomorrow. But it means that karma is stronger. That means those habits. You've just completed a habit. You've repeated a habit of lying, stealing, whatever, injuring something, sexual misconduct, taking alcohol or drugs. So these habits become stronger. That's why it's called becoming. The habits are becoming stronger. And they are going to give fuel for continued mental activity and for continued rebirth. So we go on through this process over and over again. Life, the craving, grasping, and becoming process. This means the accumulation of karma. Really, the grasping and becoming is where you're creating karma, especially the becoming. That means you make a conscious decision, I'm going to tell this lie, and you tell it. And then once you've told the lie, you can't really take it back. And somebody finds out about it, they're going to get angry, or, some results come to you, or so many other things. You sleep with somebody else's husband or wife or whatever, they come looking for you. So, that becoming causes its results. And, of fear, worry, anxiety, as well as just downright physical suffering. You might get stabbed or shot, or any number of things. Intoxicate your mind, get in a car, drive when you're drunk and crash and maybe kill yourself, or even worse, kill others. So all these things happen when the mind is, driven by this cravings and delusion. So at the time of death, so this goes on the whole life, and accumulating more and more and more stronger memories and habits, depending on how you live. Now, it could be good with things too. You can also perform good karma. And so like meditation and practicing kindness and compassion and patience and developing wisdom, developing your mind in wisdom and developing concentration. You can develop the mind in very wholesome states. That will, if you die with the mind in those wholesome states, it'll be attracted to a plane or a state where you're going to experience probably at least not too much suffering, or anyway, where you'll be able to continue kind of at what level you've left off in your evolution. We'll call it evolution. So, evolution of the mind. So anyway, the becoming, gives rise to birth. So again, this is the lifetime to lifetime process. So this mind that we've been packing with fuel, keep refueling the tank over and over and over again with karmic actions. Then when you die, the person dies, that consciousness again, as we talked about in the beginning, then again it is attracted to another plane of existence according to its karma, and then carries on again, gets born again as a baby, and then that whole process continues over and over again ad infinitum, as long as the ignorance is powered by these sankharas, especially the sankharas of greed, hatred, and delusion. This process of birth and death, or I call it external birth and death, because it means externally, these bodies, right? So this body that we can feel dies, and then a new baby comes out of the womb, and so or what we call lifetime to lifetime birth and death. And so the Buddha saw that this process will go on indefinitely until one starts to kind of wake up. And maybe, people beating their head against the wall, they keep on doing the same mistakes over and over again, keep suffering in the same old ways because of their habits. And, people come to their wits' end, and, they try all kind of therapies and drugs and other things to try to, get out of their negative psychological states or to overcome their habits. There's detox centers and not learning how to weaken their ego and hatred towards others, and all these strong defilements in the mind that keep on harming ourselves and harming the world at large. And it's because of, the 5 precepts are a very important part of the Buddhist training. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow when I talk about how Sila, Samadhi, and Panya are directly related to these stages of craving, grasping, and becoming. But for now, the 5 precepts helps a person to refrain from these gross types of negative behaviors that produce the strongest types of suffering. I think you all know them, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, telling lies, and hateful speech, slandering, and intoxicating the mind, and so on. So almost all the ills of the world, individual suffering as well as collective suffering, can be traced back to people not being able to follow these 5 skillful guidelines, or what we call skillful living, skillful conduct. And simply because of the power of the past habits and the power of ignorance. So at some point, individuals start to question the whole meaning about life and about what they're doing, and they might try to then, that's usually when the spiritual path and people start to get interested in things like spiritual teachings, and especially the Dhamma. So, because the Dhamma gives a good explanation to how this whole process of suffering and so on has come about, whereas other religions, excuse me, drink some water. So, other types of philosophies or religions, they don't really give up. I mean, they have their own theories about how the earth started and how life started, but, as far as Dhamma is concerned, we don't consider that any kind of ultimate explanation. But anyway, I don't want to get into any arguments or discussions about that. So the way of to slow down this process of rebirth, even the external process of rebirth, especially of, and again, a lot of people, the rebirth is according to our actions. And if you do these negative actions like break the precepts and live in an unskillful way, then, even in other religions, they say if you live like that, you might be born some realms of suffering, whether some other being sent you there or something, whatever the beliefs are. But so, some religions have you fear the wrath of God, that if you break these precepts, God is going to punish you. But that concept is not there in this Buddhist teaching. It's that your karma is going to sort of punish you. It's the habits that you've accumulated that are going to cause the continuation of this process of developing bodies and living again, and they keep repeating the same cycles over and over again. So anyway, when a person starts to wake up to that, then they try to, the idea is to purify the mind of greed, hatred, and delusion. So to weaken the suffering effects in this life, and if you're born in the next life, hopefully the next life would not have so much suffering in it. So whole idea of Dhamma practice is by following the Noble Eightfold Path and so on. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. That gradually you can weaken the strength of the sankharas. It's all about the sankharas because that's what propels the consciousness. And so the ignorance and sankharas. So through the Dhamma practice, we weaken those by developing meditation and so on. And then hopefully, the mind won't be so much filled with greed and hatred or guilt, worry, remorse, and fear, because that's what largely causes people's minds to be attracted to realms of misery and nightmares, and because they have all these guilt, worry, remorse, and fear of having done negative, wrong things and unskillful things, and also greed and hatred, not having forgiven people and wanting to get revenge. So even that wanting to get revenge of somebody, if you die with that still in your mind, that's going to be the fuel for rebirth, to come around and perhaps meet that person in another life, because this has happened. There's stories in the Buddha's, the stories of the Buddha's past lives where he explains these things. Now, people may not believe it, but anyway. So the idea is to weaken those greed, hatred, and delusion before you die, not thinking you do it at the time of death, but at the time of you die, so that hopefully the mind will be attracted to more pleasant states of existence until finally you can start practicing meditation and then eventually reach the paths of realization and eventually to reach the enlightenment or the end of suffering. The Buddha called it the end of suffering, or Nibbana means the end of suffering, the end of greed, hatred, and delusion. And therefore you empty the tank. So only through the practice of purifying the mind of greed, hatred, and delusion, through the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path, and we'll talk about it again next week, then gradually, if you die and you've reached that final stage of enlightenment, then there's no more fuel for the mind, and the mind will not be reborn. And don't ask, where does the mind go after death? That is something the Buddha never pointed to, because you can't really describe that. But basically, it's the unconditioned state. Actually, it's called the deathless state, or the unborn state. And I've given some talks on some of my other Zoom programs that I give on another channel that I've talked about these various states, and actually talked about this, the deathless state, the unborn state, and so on. But it's basically having transcended the ego in ego consciousness, that the mind is no longer attracted to individual existence, and it basically becomes, well, the only simile that comes to mind is if you have an ice cube floating in water, then the ice cube is made of water, isn't it? But it thinks it's different from the water. It thinks it's separate from the water, but the ice cube is actually water, isn't it? So our individual ego consciousness thinks it's different from other people around us, thinks it's different from the outside world, the subject-object consciousness. Now, when that ice cube melts, when the ego consciousness melts and never comes back together again, then can you say, where did my water go? You can't say the water doesn't exist, but you can't say it exists either in any identifiable state. So even though even that's probably not exactly the exact experience, but it's probably one of the better examples we can give with our limited language. So anyway, so that process of samsara, or the perpetually wandering mind from birth to birth, through birth and death, accumulating karma, that process is brought to an end, and along with it, all the suffering that comes along with birth and death. So, dependent on that becoming arises birth, and because you are born again, then the whole cycle continues. So there's old age, again you get old, and there's also suffering, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair in that next life, and then are dead, and the whole process repeats. And so next week I'm going to talk about the moment-to-moment rebirth. Now, a lot of people, they ask, can we really, can we be a Buddhist without believing in rebirth? And the short answer would say, well, it depends. You may not believe in lifetime to lifetime rebirth yet. Okay, if you don't believe in it, it's no big deal right away. There's no big deal. But to believe in moment-to-moment rebirth, in order to make any progress in reaching any kind of happiness, even in this life, you have to understand the nature of the mind. And you have to understand how the mind is undergoing this same process from ignorance all the way to death every moment. And, that's a little bit more difficult to understand. And I'll try to explain it next week, a little bit more detail perhaps, and some other things. But, this Paṭicca-Samuppāda, it's very profound, and it can't be understood by the common mind. That's why the common person can't grasp this. And even the Buddha said, this Dhamma is for the wise person. Not everybody's going to get it, and it's true. So, but people with an open mind and with a reasonable degree of intelligence, they can contemplate these things, and they can develop some understanding about it. But anyway, so Ananda was the Buddha's attendant, the Buddha's personal assistant for over 40 years, and he memorized all the Buddha sutras. And Ananda was only a Sotapanna; he hadn't attained full enlightenment yet. And he told the Buddha, "Oh, this dependent origination, it's so clear, he explained it so nicely. It's just so clear as can be, And the Buddha said, "Don't think like that, Ananda," because the Buddha knew Ananda wasn't fully enlightened yet. And Ananda didn't understand this moment-to-moment rebirth. He might have intellectually understood the lifetime-to-lifetime rebirth, but he didn't understand the real depth of the mind. And so the Buddha was telling him, don't say that, Ananda. This dependent origination appears deep, and it is deep. And it's because people have not understood this dependent origination that their minds have been revolving through the rounds of samsara, virtually from beginningless time. And according to that theory, we've all, in all those perhaps millions of lifetimes, we've all been interconnected in one way or another. That we've all been each other's mother, brother, father, sister, son, friend, enemy, and stranger throughout this long course of samsara. That's why when you meet somebody, immediately you might have some affinity to them, or you might have some aversion, even though you don't really know them. These could be coming from past life experiences that we have forgotten about, that were buried in the unconscious mind. And like if you haven't forgiven somebody, or you had strong love and attachment, the minds could get back together even in future lives. There are examples of that. And now again, you may not believe in that, but we're not saying that you have to believe in that. But the moment to moment rebirth, to understand the mind, how the mind is accumulating suffering from moment to moment, that you have to understand in order to be able to then weaken the factors that keep feeding that process of accumulating suffering. So I think I may have gone over this subject enough for this evening. Now I know it's it's a very big subject that I haven't gone into it in details. But again, next Wednesday night, I guess it's on the same channel at the same time, that I will be going over this process of internal rebirth, or sometimes I call it macrocosmic rebirth and microcosmic rebirth. That means the macrocosmic, the idea of lifetime to lifetime, the larger Saṁsāra, as opposed to microcosmic, which means the moment to moment, just the process that's occurring in the individual mind. And how we use that to transform the mind using the Eightfold Path and the 3 stages of Sila, Samadhi, and Panna. Okay? So I don't know if there's time for any questions or not. Let me see if Venerable Sudaso is around, or they're allowed for that, or I don't know. Or...
Yes, Bhante. Yes, Bhante, there's several questions. So maybe we can try to get through a few of these questions. I see at least 3 questions. The first one is from Gita. Gita asks, Bhante, do sankharas act as fuel to our consciousness for continued birth?
Well, that's what I was saying in this talk. It's the sankharas that have been powered by ignorance and that we've accumulated in this life. They go into the unconscious mind and they become the sankharas that then come along with the rebirth consciousness to the new baby, in the new life. Yes, okay. It's the sankharas. And we create new sankharas later on that I'll talk about next week in day to day, and those continually you work in a feedback loop that keep on feeding back into the sankharas that are going to keep propelling the mind forward. I mean, it's kind of a complex thing to understand.
Thank you, Bhante. And Pial asks, can craving for non-becoming be a subtle form of desire for release? A corruption of insight, a higher form of fetter towards the end of the path before right release?
Well, there could be a desire for attaining liberation. I wouldn't call it non-becoming. But yeah, non-becoming, that means you reduce the becoming and you create positive becoming instead of negative becoming. So first you can't just eliminate all becoming. Most people are not going to be able to do that right away. So we have to decrease the negative becoming that causes most of the suffering. And we have to create the wholesome qualities, the wholesome states of mind, like generosity and love, compassion, wisdom and mindfulness, and these kind of wholesome qualities. So that's called positive becoming, and that will give us the right conditions to accumulate more and more good karma, so to speak, and to keep in contact with the Dharma and people that we can continue to learn from. So the craving for non-becoming is first you have to develop the desire to attain the higher realms of becoming, whether it's a human being, and then you have to work gradually through the stages of letting go of the attachment to the Brahma realms and then the formless realms. We may talk more about that maybe tomorrow. But it's a complicated subject.
Okay, thank you. And Pial also asks, is Sankara already present even before the 6 sense bases are triggered, forming more volitional formations as per dependent, I think she means dependent origination. Can these be classified as asavas?
Well, asavas are the outflows. Basically, yes, asavas are the sankharas too. But yeah, the sankharas come with the consciousness. Now, the 6 senses are not developed in the fetus right away, right? I don't know. They might come some months later. They start developing eyes, or whatever in the womb. It takes 9 months, right, to get the senses kind of fully developed, and then you're born. So the sankharas might be, if you had the karma to be born blind, then the sankharas might be helping to condition the conditions of that developing fetus, that you could be born blind or some other type of deformities. So those are in the sankharas and the memories, the karmic memories and so on, accumulated from the past life. So that can happen, according to the Buddha, and that you bring those propensities with us.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And the last question for tonight is from Kumu. Kumu asks, Bhante, if we recognize craving arising and then stop it before it becomes grasping, isn't that a good place to stop the process? Isn't craving to grasping easier to break than the other steps of the 12?
No. And that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. Becoming is the easiest one to break. And then grasping, craving is the hardest one to break. It's the last one to go. But I'll explain that tomorrow. You may not understand it right now, but hopefully, not tomorrow, excuse me, next Wednesday.
Okay, well, that's the last of the questions. So thank you very much, Bhante, for your Dhamma talk and for answering questions. So we can all end the program with 3 sadhu. So please join your hands in Anjali, wherever you are. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
May you all be well, happy, and peaceful. May all your hopes and wishes succeed. May you attain freedom from suffering in this very life.
Sadhu.
And remember, mindfulness a day keeps dukkha away.
And if you would like to have more programs with Bhante Rahula, you can follow him on his own channel, I believe. And you can also visit his retreat center in Maryland. So he is offering some limited attendance programs at his temple, so you're welcome to check that out. If you want to learn more on dependent origination, the second part of Bhante Rahula's talk will be same time next week, so Wednesday at the same time next week. And also tomorrow in the morning, Bhante Kusala will be also giving a talk on Paṭicca-Samuppāda. And tomorrow evening, Bhante Sankitcha, also on dependent origination. This is Dependent Origination Week at Empty Cloud Monastery.
Head full.
Yeah, the more perspectives, the better, I find.
That's true.
Yeah. So that's it for this evening. So thank you again, Bhante, for your guidance and teachings. And thank you to everyone who joined in. So we'll see you next time.
Okay. Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Buddhaya.